You're listening to Communicate with Zen and John from Empower Your English.
We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today. At Monash University, Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Hi everyone, I'm Zen, and with me is my co-host John.
Hi everybody, great to have you on board again. I hope you're going to enjoy another informative show. Empower Your English has been going for about 2 years. I'll probably change that timeline every time I say it. We're all about empowering people's, we don't empower, we listen to people's stories around communication. We've got two great guests in the studio tonight with us that Zed will introduce shortly. In the meantime, you can look at our website, eyenow.melbourne. This show is streamed across the world. So feel free to send us an email if you've got any questions, concerns, or perhaps like to be involved. Our website is zen@eyenow.melbourne. So we're going to be here from 6 p.m. till 7, and we hope you enjoy the stimulated conversation at today's Communicate program. Who have you got, Zen?
We have Marta and also Amanda. We have two guests here today. So maybe it's the time to move on to the introduction of our guest now. So I will introduce Marta first. Musicka-Williams has been working in the area of international education for the past 20 years. Marta's work has given her extensive experience on intercultural competency in the education sector. Marta is the Director of Academic and Professional English at Monash University. Marta's specific interests include language and culture, linguistics, and conversational language learning methodology. A key focus for Marta is to continue to develop programs enabling international students' engagement and leading towards intercultural competency. And we also have Amanda in the studio. Amanda Musicka-Williams is a practicing drama therapist in Australia and a graduate researcher at Melbourne University's Creative Arts Therapist Research Unit. Her practice and research use creative tools and a holistic approach to learning, connection, and relationship building. Amanda has worked with young people in special education, adults in psychiatric care, and community mental health, youth in juvenile.
What a word, juvenile.
Juvenile, yeah, juvenile
word.
Justice. I can't really pronounce that word
Younger
well.
people. Well, that's English. What's another word for juvenile? Marta?
Oh, I think would be younger.
Younger.
Young people.
Younger's good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe you just like younger justice then. Yeah, so youth who are disengaging from school and children who have experienced domestic violence. Amanda also has her own private practice that supports families with children on autism spectrum.
Well, Zen, what a mix of people we've got here. Very stimulating conversation. So we're going to start with you, Marta. The question goes in.
Okay, so wow, the first question is about empowerment. So thinking about communication, what does the word empowerment mean to you?
Look, when we're talking about communication, we need to understand we're talking about language, we're talking about body language, we're talking about expressions, we're also talking about dress codes and everything else that actually gives people around us a message. And that is a message that we want to project about ourselves to others. If I just focus on language at this, in this first question, language does empower people, but it really needs to be carefully used and reflected upon. Just using a language fluently doesn't really mean we are very good speakers or communicators, that we're communicating what we want to communicate. Language actually carries identity. Language carries intellect and emotions. And when we are not the first speaker of a language or any language, but let's say English in this case, that becomes quite a complex notion of communication, because you are pinning your empowerment or your power to a language that is a foreign. So you're missing or you're lacking quite a lot in that language, and you're always looking for things that are going to express what you really want. The second point is the intellect. When you have a sophisticated language, and when you grow up in the language, you are able to express yourself quite well in it. When you learn second, third, fourth language, English is my third language, you're actually missing a lot of sophistication in that language, which makes you feel dumb, but it also makes other people perceive you differently than what you would love to. And thirdly, it's actually language carries emotions, and emotions are very intimate, and so that intimate emotion can only be expressed when you know language very well. Otherwise, you're expressing a lot of it just on the surface. So language to me and communication is very, very important as a powerful tool for expressing myself and actually telling the world around myself who I am and how I want to be perceived.
Marta, we've been doing the show, Zen and I, for not just on the radio, but at workshops about communication. You're the first person, and I respect, I'd like you to talk a bit more about the clothes you wear. That's interesting. Could you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, look, we all make choices, and we make choices with language, but we also make choices how we want to be presented. If I want to be presented as a trendy person, I will choose clothes that will express what I want other people to see and what I would like other people to think about me. And we all know that when we go for a job interview, we will dress professionally because we were told that that's how what's the appropriate way to do. But also people will look at us and will perceive and will get a certain impression on us wearing those clothes. So it is a choice we make, and we are communicating through that.
And for all those people out there to say, I'm wearing this because it's clean, we need to accept that, don't we?
Yes, well, I think we need to accept
right,
that.
Because
we're busy people.
And I couldn't find my other sock, so that's why it's yellow and green.
Fantastic.
Let's move on. Thanks, Marta.
Pleasure.
So how about Amanda?
I'm a therapist, so when I think about empowerment, I think about it as a real individual process, and one of the things that is key is being heard or being witnessed. And a lot of people talk about a social justice lens, but I think put in a really simple way, empowerment is very much about asking people what they want, because what is empowering to one person may not be empowering to somebody else. And communication is a part of that, but I also think inclusion in wider networks is key to empowerment as well. And that's why we have groups who quite often feel marginalised because they're sort of part of an exclusive identity, but they're not included in wider social networks.
So it sounds good that when you say people know what they want, as you know, in the field, you'll see many people have got no idea what they want.
That's very true.
Or they might like to take a risk and try something, but what advice do you have those people say, I know what I want to do, but I'm too scared to do it?
Well, I'm a drama therapist, so it's all about, in the practice, is about extending people's experience beyond their normal repertoire. So trying new ways of interrelating with people, a new presentation of self through creative modalities. And just being...
that word again,
modalities, creative modalities. So different ways to express yourself in an artistic or creative way.
Example, please.
So someone might feel limited in their life by certain roles that they play. So drama therapists talk a lot about a role repertoire, which is in different situations and in different relationships in life, we tend to act differently or present differently depending on the setting or the person that we're engaging with. And we can become quite limited or stuck by a certain set of roles. And so extending yourself to try things that you don't normally do might actually increase the ways in which you can engage in the world, which will create confidence in new settings.
At the end of the day, it's all communication.
Yes, so there is a lot of different tools to communicate. For example, like Marta mentioned, that we can use our appearance, our clothes to communicate. And Amanda said that we can communicate with others, our uniqueness and our creativity through the drama and other tools as well, alternative tools, I would say. So I think it really depends on how does we genuinely communicate with others.
I think that's true. It's about being genuine, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I've got some other questions later on. We will talk about how do we know we're being listened to and stuff like that, but I won't do it now.
Yeah. So apart from that, in the drama therapy, I think that the body language is a way to communicate, right? So talk about the body language. I think that is a two-way communication method. So how do you use it, and why does it work in some cases, maybe for drama therapy or maybe for the connection with international students?
Maybe Amanda, you go first.
Okay. Well, therapy is a two-way street too. So as a therapist, I've got to think about my presence in the space. So my body language needs to be congruent with what I'm trying to communicate verbally to a client. So a therapist's presence is really going to affect the interaction that goes on with their client. So it's very much about being calm and centred and being very focused on the person. And we speak a lot in special education about full body listening, and that's about actually turning your body towards the person and being actively engaged. We also refer to active listening. So quite often people think of listening as a very passive thing that we do, and actually when you break it down scientifically, it's actually much harder to listen. There's a lot more parts of the body that are being engaged when you're able to recall what the person said and you're actively engaged than there is when you're speaking. So it is about constantly centering and bringing yourself back to the process. But I also think for me it's about making a connection with a client, and that's not always through words. I quite often deliberately mirror someone's actions, and there might be two reasons for that. It might be to create a connection with someone that's quite playful, and then we can move on from sort of repeated gestures that they have or pattern kinds of behaviour and engage in a playful way. Or it might also just be getting them to try some new things. So I tend to play with my body as a tool and to encourage other people to extend themselves beyond what is their general sort of habitual repertoire. And I find that if you're in connection with a person, we talk about the mirror neurons and how we naturally mirror other people's movements, and that is a really good indication of when you're connected to somebody else and when they're actively engaged with.
And what I like about you is you're multitasking, because you're sitting in front of the microphone on a swivel chair and your hips are going left and right, but your mouth is staying right near the microphone. That is so cool, sister.
I'm self-regulating, yeah.
We're all sitting here on swivel chairs, but you're the one dancing, so it's good.
You're listening to Communicate with Zen and John from Empower Your English.
Okay, so welcome back to Communicate. In the studio, we have Marta, and also we have Amanda as our guests. So I think I will briefly introduce our guests again. So Marta has been working in the area of international education for the past 20 years. Marta's work has given her extensive experience on intercultural competency in the education sector. Marta is the Director of Academic and Professional English at Monash University. And Amanda is a practicing drama therapist in Australia and a graduate researcher at Melbourne University's Creative Arts Therapist Research Unit. Her practice and research use creative tools and a holistic approach to learning, connection, and relationship building. So I think we will back to the second question about the body language.
You better read that again.
Okay. So this question is about body language is two-way communication method. How do you use it, and why does it work in some cases?
Okay, so that's over to me probably. What I would like to touch here is just really highlighting that body language is actually culture-based. Body language that does not translate or work across cultures most of the time. So sometimes it does, but it's quite culturally based. So body language in one culture might not express the same meanings as in the second culture. So we need to be quite careful when we're communicating across cultures with people who are culturally, linguistically different, or when we are actually living or working or traveling in another country, because we will tend to go back to our own culture, which might not work in a host environment. In saying this, I'm coming from a culture that is quite contact-based, so which means that in that culture, when we're communicating, we like to stand close to people and touch people. And that's obviously something it does not work in Australian environment. Australian culture is fairly linear, and it wanted to have a personal space around the person. So that transgressing that personal space is quite a communication issue when your body is actually closing on to someone else and makes your co-speaker quite uncomfortable. So I use a lot of body language, but I need to self-regulate, as Amanda pointed out, because forever I need to be standing back, not touching people, because it's not always taken the way I mean it. And also I'm a teacher by training, so I use a lot of facial expressions, so my students always know what I mean, or where I'm standing, or where I'm going, and I think I'm quite expressive in that sense.
Could I ask a bit more just about touching, because I think it is fascinating. When we talk about the very common, the embrace, the hug, when you meet somebody, and that's it can be quite dangerous, because it sort of it can give the wrong message.
Yeah.
But there are people who are real huggers. My family's full of hugging. And strangers, doesn't matter. Hi, how are you? Just watch people's face if you're not used to it.
Yeah, well, John, it's funny that you're mentioning this. Just before I came here, I was actually in a classroom full of adult international students, and that was a question that came up because they said, well, look, we see Australians hugging, but if I try to hug someone, people tend to be a bit hesitant. So it's very difficult to guess when you hug and when you don't hug. And Australia is such a multicultural country and such a multicultural nation. So we would have people from Latin America or from Southern Europe. They are touchy-feely people. Where they meet you, they will like to hug you, even in the workplace. And we know that practice in the workplace in Australia could be quite unwelcome and dangerous, because it's actually really against our rules. So it's important that we have those conversations and explain, especially to students who come here for the first time or new to a country, when it's appropriate to touch and when it's not.
And of course, you've got other types of touching, which is the old high five, knuckles, pat on the back.
Yeah.
There's so many, but it's all communication.
Correct.
And you just got to, I guess, have confidence in the person you're doing it to, and really read their response straight afterwards.
Correct.
Oops, that didn't go down too well.
Yep.
We won't do high five again.
Exactly right.
So, I think body language is very important. And may I ask Amanda questions about, like, I know that you also work with people with autism as well. So, like, I know that there is, like, differences in the communication with people with autism.
Yeah.
So, like, how do we, like, use our body language when we communicate?
Look, autism is so diverse. It's a very diverse spectrum, and I don't think people who haven't had first-hand experience always understand how diverse it is. But at its extreme end, some people with autism can have very repetitive behaviours. I use a process called intensive interaction, which is very much about starting where the person's at. So you don't try and pull them into your world, you actually step into theirs. So it's a lot of copying what they're doing and then gradually extending it in a minute way. So for example, if someone is consistently tapping their leg, you would tap your leg back in close proximity to them so that they can see that you're actually doing what they're doing. And what I usually find with the young people that I work with is that they're quite interested, that someone is actually interested to do the thing that they're always doing, that no one's ever wanting them to do. So it sort of gets quite an immediate response. And this is the premise of intensive interaction, to meet people where they're at and then gradually extend them beyond that, so that they can have a more extended experience of themselves. It's not about normalising or pulling them into your way of being. It's about finding a middle ground that's quite playful and that makes them want to engage with you, which is a key tool in relationship building. So.
Thank you. Thanks for the that information, and also we know more about, and also and the world will know more about this as well. So we will move on to the third questions. So now, looking at your own success, can you share with us a particular situation or time where you felt your communication method was effective, and how did you know about it?
Well, I can probably share very many situations where my communication was not effective. Yes, I learned English through school, not very effectively, have to say, because when I came to Australia, I could hardly buy a bus ticket. Australian English is very different that we do not hear in schools, where we come from. But also it is a conversational practice that we have never had. So for quite a few years, actually, my communication was very ineffective. I actually then started to feel quite self-conscious, and I felt I was losing the intellectual edge, that I was losing the sophistication I had in my other languages, and I started to reflect on why is this. So what I've realized is that in English, what I was doing, I was using a lot of softening words and modal verbs, which would be really communicating to other people my unsureness about myself. I would be using words like I think instead of being very positive. This is what it is. I would be using words like maybe or shall and be very soft, which actually communicated to people that I'm quite unsure what I want or what I want to express. So I really radically chose to communicate with a more positive and more confident language, and avoiding those modality in linguistics. And I think that was a successful method.
What was the changing point for you as far as why did you do that?
Why did I do that? I've actually, every time I spoke to people in a professional setting, I felt that I wasn't quite understood the way that I wanted to be understood. And many times I walked away from conversations thinking, I don't think that I've actually expressed myself well. And after the event or after conversation, I had lots of ideas how I could do this better. And that's, I think, what helped me, just really thinking about what didn't go so well and how and why and how can I improve it.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
How about Amanda?
Okay, my turn. I've recently, well, I say recently because I've been a drama therapist for about 16 years, but I've only been something of an academic for the last couple of years, and stepping back into that kind of environment with its expectations and its particular jargon was quite a challenge to begin with. And I think it's about finding your own authentic way of communicating a message. So part of doing a PhD, you have to do a lot of presentations, whether you like to talk at people or not. And I came from this space where I was imparting my tools and whatever it was that I had to offer in a more experiential based way. So I found that there's two things that I've kind of fed in from my practice, which feels more like myself and who I am. into my presentations, and one of them is to not just talk at people, but to actually get them up doing things. So to give them an experience of what it is that you're talking about, and I've found that gets a really good response, because after people have been talked at for a while, they tend to switch off. I probably shouldn't say that on a radio show.
Oh, you're still here, eh?
Yeah, I'm still here. So it sort of gave them an embodied sense of what it was that I was talking about, and tools that they could actually take away with it. It also gave them, they were having an emotional experience to concepts rather than just intellectualising it. And I got a lot of positive feedback about people liking the integration of, well, here's the talking and the theoretical framework, but this is what the practice looks like. So I think practical knowledge is important as the words that are spoken. So that involves giving people a bit of an experience. And more than anything, I think if you're really passionate about a topic and you're willing to sort of open yourself up and demonstrate that passion, it's what brings people on board. I think that's probably the most effective communication tool you can be for bringing people in on any of your ideas, is to express your passion for something.
That sounds interesting. And as Marta mentioned, that like when we say maybe, that actually is we felt that we may not sure what we want. And I do have that language before as well. Yeah, so I'm also learning how to be like assertive and also how to like speak up my thinking or my opinion sometimes as well, to be more assertive. Thank you for that reminder again.
Go Zed.
Pleasure.
You're on fire.
Yeah. So we will move on to the next. So drawing on your backgrounds in the areas that you have worked in, is there a golden rule that you can share with our listeners or audience who may be entering the workforce or are trying to break into their field of interest?
I think I have about 3 golden rules, and
Only 3.
Yep, but I think if I should really go down to one, and I will always say to anyone, take risk. With communication, you have to take risk. You have to talk, to actually learn, to actually hear, and to see your co-speakers' reactions. Because if you don't speak, you don't practice. And Amanda will probably say that the same it will be in drama. It is a practice that you're taking, and you're learning on mistakes. So if you're too shy, if you don't practice, you don't get opportunity to get better. So that's the first one. In the workplace, I think we're quite well positioned to enter the workplace with skills and so on. But what we are less fluent in is small talk. And the small talk in Australian setting is very, very interesting, but it's also very important tool to communicate and connect with your co-workers on a professional level, but also on a personal level. It doesn't need to go into the personal details, but you need to have that little conversations about the weather, how the Sunday was, how the weekend was, because that's what's expected. So, John, if you never say anything to me, I would be wondering, do you really hate me? Or, I'd be having questions. What do you think about myself? And a lot of Western societies, especially American and Australian societies, they really are conducive to small talk. And there's actually research that shares and shows that if you engage in small talk, it's more likely you'll get a promotion
That's
faster.
interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating you say that, because I'm often talking to my friends about, do we really need to know, is it a nice day today? So...
You're listening to Communicate with Zen and John from Empower Your English.
That's not small talk, that's us.
Yes, it's the talk of communication.
It is.
Okay, so I will introduce our 2 speakers again in the studio. So Marta has been working in the area of international education for the past 20 years. Marta's work has given her extensive experience on intercultural competency in the education sector, and she is the Director of Academic and Professional English at Monash University. And Amanda Amanda is a practicing drama therapist in Australia and a graduate researcher at Melbourne University Creative Arts Therapist Research Unit. Her practice and research use creative tools and a holistic approach to learning, connection, and relationship building. I feel like to repeat the questions again. Thank you for Marta's sharing of your free golden rules, and that is the opportunity for Amanda to share her golden rules. So the question is about drawing on your backgrounds in the areas that you have worked in. Is there a golden rule that you can share with our listeners who may be entering the workforce or trying to break into their field of interest?
Yes, I have a little mantra. I call it the triple P. It's
P.
for patience, perseverance, and passion. When I came back from training in the United Kingdom as a drama therapist, no one had ever heard of it, and there's still no master's level training here for drama therapists. So there's very few of us around Australia, and we've all been trained overseas. So I think my family and friends were concerned that I would never have a job. I cold rang over 250 organisations and sent out information packs. These days you wouldn't do that. You'd just email them or pop up a thing on Facebook or some other social media and advertise yourself in that way. So be prepared to bang on a lot of doors, but if you really want to do something and you persevere, then I honestly believe it's very much about your level of enthusiasm and how much hard work you're willing to put in.
Interesting when you persevere, because going back to what you were saying, Marta, about risk. Okay, persevere. There is real risk that you're going to say doors can be shut in your face, and you're going to say that didn't work, that approach didn't work, but that's okay. Move on, keep going. That's where perseverance is really powerful, to take the risk and try again.
And always put your best face forward, because a lot of work is generated from other work. So once you get in one place and someone sees what you can do, they quite often pass it on to somebody else.
Okay, say that again. Best face forward.
Yes.
Not foot?
No, I say best face forward.
Okay,
it's the drama therapist, yeah.
You see the face.
I purposefully said that.
Did you? Okay, best face forward. So, in other words, to put up there what you do well.
Yeah,
first.
to showcase yourself and always be aware that, you know, if you're really passionate about what you're doing, that you give it your all every time you go in there, regardless of how small you think that opportunity might be, because you never know who's going to speak about you to someone else.
Okay, so you've got a piece of paper, you've got a qualification in a particular area. You've done that. Is that your best foot forward or best face forward, or is it's not something that you want to proceed? You want to do something differently. You happen to have this qualification, but you want to try and promote a different area that is interesting you at the moment. Mm-hmm. How do you tackle that?
I think it's about talking to as many people as you possibly can in as many different forums, and as much as I'm not much of a technology junkie, there is a whole world out there that is making it quite easily accessible for people to publicise themselves. And to get support in doing so. We're talking about people who don't have English as a first language, but, you know, there are always people out there who will help you actually polish it up so that you can put it out in that forum. I think it's about advertising yourself in as many places as possible and also demonstrating what it is that you can do. So I actually did quite a bit of volunteer work when I started, just to show people what I could do. So
love that word, volunteering. Very powerful, isn't it? It really
we?
is. Great stories around volunteering.
Yeah. So, Amanda, could you mind to repeat your 3 P's again? 3 P.
Oh, my 3 P's, yes. Okay, so patience, perseverance, and passion.
Love it.
Thank you. Amanda, would you mind to repeat and remind us about your 3 golden rules?
Take risks, engage in small talk at the workplace, and choose positive language.
Mm-hmm.
Love all of that. Make a note, folks. These are things that will help others.
Yeah, and integrate that as our strategy in the daily life as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we move on to the mentoring. So, like, in your organizations or your experience, what are your views on mentoring? And can you tell us about a time when you have mentored someone or have been mentored?
Oh, you've read my bio about 3 times by now, so everyone knows that I've been in the workforce for quite a long time. And look, mentoring is very powerful. I grew through different mentors in my career, and each of them, they've been very different, but they all brought brought the best out of me. And I really believe in mentoring. So I've been at Monash for about 6 years, and I've been in the management positions for about, 16 years. And throughout those times, I've learned that the best way to get people to work with you in a collaborative manner and to get them do what you actually want to do as a manager. That's what you're doing. You mentor them, and you mentor them through your own ups and downs, and you mentor them in a way that is conducive for them to grow, and so provide them that opportunity to be reflective in their practices, but also then to grow in a way that they would find it quite impossible maybe half a year earlier. So at Monash and in our area, English Connect, we are very heavily relying on mentoring, and we have different levels of mentoring, and we're putting this into the professional practice, and we're putting this into the students' practices, and we're hoping that is going to continue to be conducive to a really a fantastic work environment.
Is it fair to say one of the challenges with mentoring is to try and get that perfect match?
Yeah.
So there's a win-win situation?
Yeah, look, mentoring is also giving people a lot of feedback, and that's not always positive. So this is another set of questions altogether. And I think that it has to be quite clear when you mentor someone and when people are entering the mentoring relationship that they need to know that there is going to be conversation, that it's not always going to be about the positive, that it is going to be based on need to improve or need to do things differently. It works both ways for mentor and a mentee.
So how about Amanda?
I think it's really important, and it's nice to hear that it happens so much here at Monash Uni, because I've sort of had the opposite experience in my field. So when I trained in the UK, it was you had to have what they called a supervisor, which plays a similar role. Whether you were volunteering in an organisation or whether it was paid work, someone had to supervise you. So you would go and speak about your work and the response that you were having to your work, and they would give you feedback. And I think it's really important to have that outside eye and to have someone who has a greater level of experience than you. And it was something that I really missed coming home to Australia, because of course there weren't colleagues to talk to, so it's quite difficult. And it's only been stepping back into the academic world where that's been opened up again, and the learning that has happened in the last couple of years, because I'm able to draw on people who are much more knowledgeable than me and who've been in the practice for a much longer time, has been incredible compared to sort of getting stuck in repeated repertoires and patterns, which we all do. Oh, well, this works, so I'll just keep doing that. So I think it's really important to have an outside eye. On the other hand, I took on board someone. It was quite an interesting situation where I went to a professional development course, and the people there weren't really happy with how the course was run. And so we sort of all gathered together, and it ended up being a great networking opportunity. And there was a young psychology student there, and he was really interested, just hungry for any opportunity he could possibly have, and not really interested in young people with special needs, but willing to step outside of his comfort zone and try something new. And I said, well, if you want to have a diverse experience, I can offer you this. And so he came along to my school, fell in love with the young people that I work with, as everybody does, because they're so great. And he's been working alongside with me every year for the last 4 years, running a social skills program for kids who are struggling at school for various reasons. We run it over the summer holidays, and I'm a lot older than him, so I am perceived as the knowledgeable one. But it's just been really great to share our commonalities across fields, but also our differences, and to add to each other's toolbox. And for me, playing that role of mentor with him, because it was very much about, he'd never done that work before, so I was really facilitating him through that process. It really made me step back and look at things a lot more clearly in terms of what was going on. So I agree that it's a two-way process, and it's really important, and I think it's something that should be integrated in a lot more professional practices.
Interesting you say that there wasn't a lot of that happening overseas, is that right?
No, there was a lot happening overseas. There was nothing happening here when I came home, mainly because there weren't other professionals here to draw from.
Got it wrong. We've got a question coming up about listing, haven't we? I just failed. I was just going to talk about, just throw my hat in, we were talking about mentoring. It links very closely to peer support too, where mentoring is a one-on-one. But if you start making it a bit wider, you get smaller groups. Would it be fair to say to both of you that peer support is also a type of mentoring?
Absolutely. John, I've actually set up English Connect here at Monash, and English Connect has 13,000 students every year through our programs, and our programs are all peer-to-peer, because I believe that is such a strong pull between peers that works much better than when you put myself in front of the class. So yes, I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, I think of the young people that I work with, and the impact when one of them can help the other is far more profound than when an adult intervenes.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And also mentoring is a type of to share the experience as well. Like, yeah. Okay, so in the situation when you have to communicate information that you know people don't want to hear or accept, so what strategies have worked for you?
Oh, I think Amanda both work at university, so there's a lot of times where you have to persuade.
Let's have a non-university answer, please. Put pressure on you. Forget about university.
I've got a non-university answer.
Okay, you go.
I've got a trick that I do. It's a little bit manipulative.
A what?
So it's a little bit manipulative.
Okay.
And I do it in my personal life and my professional life, so it crosses both arenas. When I need to deliver a message to someone, and it's usually about there's something that they've done, so something in their behaviour has either upset myself or someone else. Quite often I'm a bit of a mediator, so quite often I'm speaking for someone else. But I find that sometimes hearing that they shouldn't do the behaviour because of someone else isn't very motivating. So what I tend to do is I try to get them to focus on how would changing their behaviour benefit them. So instead of focusing on what the other person's reaction is, as a catalyst for change, I'm talking to them about, well, actually, what do you think is happening when you do this? And if you did it differently, could you see how things might be better for you? So it's about framing it so that whatever change needs to happen is to their advantage, rather about it being in relation to the reaction of someone else.
Could you give us an example at all?
Yes. So I worked with a very challenging young boy some years ago, and everyone found it quite difficult to engage this young man, and he had all the labels: oppositional defiance disorder, personality disorder, those things that make it quite difficult to work on a level of social motivation. So we would write up contracts with him because he sort of needed a script to follow and a reminder, but we would always sort of make the scripts around, well, if you do this, what would the reward be for him? Because he wasn't motivated to change behaviours based on other people's reactions. He actually liked provoking other people. He was only motivated to change his behaviours in terms of what the benefit to himself would be.
Sounds like my brother.
I'm sure there's a few out there. That's why I say it's my kind of sneaky manipulative tool.
It is sneaky.
You're listening to Communicate with Zen and John from Empower Your English.
We have facilitating communication and discussion before, but again, my responsibility is to introduce our guest here again. So, Marta has been working in the area of international education for the past 20 years, and she has given her extensive experience on intercultural competency in the education sector, and she also is a director of academic and professional English at Monash University. And Amanda is a practicing drama therapist in Australia and a graduate researcher at Melbourne University's Creative Arts Therapist Research Unit. Her practice and research use creative tools and a holistic approach to learning, connection, and relationship building. So, John, do you remember what we discussed before?
You're putting me on the spot now. We've discussed so much before. Remind me, please, Zen.
I think we are focusing on what strategies that Marta or Amanda has working on, the situation that when we have to communicate information that the people don't want to hear or accept, right?
Exactly, yes. So, you want my thoughts on that? That's why we have the guest here. It's interesting about different types of communication. I'm going to distract a little bit because we've got a poem I'm going to read. Amanda's going to read it.
If we meet and I say hi, that's a salutation. If you ask me how I feel, that's a consideration. If we stop and talk a while, that's a conversation. If we understand each other, that's a communication. If we argue, scream and fight, that's an altercation. If later we apologise, that's a reconciliation. If we help each other home, that's a cooperation. And all these actions added up make civilization.
We've actually read that once before a few weeks ago, and I just thought it was a very powerful message about different types of communication and how words are used.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we move on to the next question. So in the work you are doing, how important is listening, and do you ever reflect on, are you doing it well?
Ooh. Look, listening is super important skills, and Amanda has opened the discussion before, and I'm sure she will continue to have that discussion and will tell us more. Just in the work I do day to day, I actually work with young people whose English is not their first language, and there's a very big section of population here at Monash, and listening is quite a difficult skill to master. It's easy to camouflage because, unless someone is checking and you have to respond, you can pretend you're listening. And I'm sure our husbands, wives, partners and close friends would know that very well. However, when you have active listening, you're actually responding while you're listening. So your core speaker will read your body language, will read your face, and will get the messages that you're really listening or if you're not really listening. Now, in the work we do around communication and English language development, we actually listen a lot to our young facilitators, to the peers who are actually developing the programs around developing English language. And they always come up with fascinating idea. So I suppose just listening to people, it makes you grow, but it makes also your work grow. So forever we are developing new programs, we're offering new workshops, we're changing the contents. It's because we're listening. And listening is an active skill that requires some actions upon listening. And I'm sure Amanda will have deep thoughts on it.
As a therapist, listening is fundamental. But I think of listening as a full embodied approach, not just using your ears. So in therapy, we talk about countertransference, which sounds like this magical gobbledygook word if you're not working within that profession. And it's about the way it's basically about the way you feel when you're with someone. So if you experience a countertransference, you kind of know that you are really present and you are really listening because you've been impacted by what the person is sharing with you. And I don't think it is something that is just happens in the therapy space. I think it happens in real life. So, for example, if you meet up with a friend and they're in a bad way and you're sharing a cup of tea and they're telling you their sad story and you have actively engaged in that encounter and taken on board what they've said, you'll generally walk away with a bit of a mood having been affected by that. So I think it's a full body process. So it's being able to recall what's been said, but it's more... I think what's being communicated is more than that, and you'll know by the response that you take away whether you've been actively engaged in that moment or not.
Looking through the drama therapy lens,
Mm-hmm.
you need to observe what's going on. You're not listening. You're using your eyes a lot, aren't you? Could you share with us some particular characteristics that stand out when you're looking perhaps on issues around behaviour or aggression about people's body movement when you're looking at drama?
Yeah, I guess we look at sort of patterns of movement, and when somebody is sort of calm and in sync with their actions and what they're doing and okay with their environment, they tend to flow, whereas you can see someone begin to be agitated because their movements become more jerky or incongruent with what they're saying. So, yeah, we're always watching visual cues. I think we take in a lot of what I call emotional cues as well. So you're picking up on a mood, and I think the sense that comes off people and some of the more unconscious communications that go on in between people in relationship that are not always spoken about, the ways that we impact each other are really fundamental to how we feel when we're with other people as well.
Thank you.
Okay. I would like to know more about what advice do you give to people that wants to be a leader in a particular field? However, they are not confident to be assertive. How can they become more assertive?
I don't actually think you need to be assertive to be a leader. I think what you need to be is a positive person and communicate that positiveness and confidence through your language. And I think that's the way you will get much further than being assertive, because being assertive means having to say no, many, many times. But when you are communicating with others and you project your confidence and you project your positive thoughts, they will often follow without you needing to push them. So I don't think the assertiveness is the most necessary element of being a good leader. I think projecting confidence is the key.
So, how about Amanda?
I think it's about authenticity. I remember the beginning of my academic career, if I can put it that way. I stood up and did a presentation that was what I thought research was supposed to be. Didn't get a very good response. And I kind of learnt from that it was totally incongruent with who I was, my practice and my values. So you need to believe what it is that you're saying and be able to stand behind it and not be sort of trying to mould yourself too artificially to fit an environment. I think enhance your strengths. We tend to be hypercritical of ourselves, and other people don't always notice the things that we'll really beat ourselves up about. So you can always frame what could I have done better, but it's also important to acknowledge what you did well. Otherwise it's sort of difficult to persevere along that journey if you're not kind to yourself. And I think preparation is key. Whatever you're going to do, if you feel nervous, practice. And I always practice my presentations with a friend and ask for feedback. I mean, I guess being a drama therapist, rehearsal is part of the process. That's sort of, but I really encourage anyone to not go into things blind, particularly if you're prone to nerves. And I also think developing some kind of self-calming practice. I use a lot of movement, a lot of meditation in my life, and I wish I had started that earlier, just so that you can have a sense of being able to drop back into yourself and breathe before you attempt to do things that are scary, because we all do scary things, and I don't think being scared should stop anybody.
Just talking about lived experience, leadership. Sharing your own lived experience can be quite powerful, can't it? You can get information from books, but to share stories about yourself?
Oh, absolutely, and I think the best presentations I have seen have been because someone's moved me, because I felt moved. Yeah.
So I can hear another 3 P's from 2 guest speakers again. Maybe I can say preparation.
Yeah, preparation.
And then practice. And also projecting confidence.
Correct.
Okay.
So lots of peace today.
Yeah, I think we get 6 P's today. Yep. So, wow, time goes so fast. This is our last question right now. So, looking at your own communication style, if we are able to turn back the clock to 2 years ago, what have you learned and what could you do differently?
Oh, Zen, 2 years is a very short time.
We've got to change this question.
I will go down, 5-10 years time, because I think when you are growing as a professional and professionally and personally, you're actually looking at the change over a bit longer time than 2 years. So over the last 5-10 years, what I've learned about it is a lot about myself. And I think that was kind of a way of self-discovery. Why, asking a lot of whys. Why am I acting the certain way? Why I'm reacting to people a certain way? Why am I connecting with people in a certain way? So there was a lot of reflective practices in my last, 10-15 years that impacted on my actions and impacted on my communication styles, but it also impacted on people around me, because they could actually see the change, and just looking back I could see where I was coming from, and sometimes I'm amazed at the journey that I went through, where you have almost zero language to where you're actually leading a language unit at university. I think there's quite a story behind that.
I would slow down and simplify things. I think my head is a very busy place, and I tended to overcomplicate things, and you're more likely to bring more people on board if you speak in ways that is accessible. I would take more risks, so I would jump into things a lot sooner than I did. But I guess the things that I said before about preparing for those things, and I think the key preparation is being really clear about what it is that you want to say and who your audience is. I think in stepping back in to do a PhD, it took me a long time to understand what it was that I really wanted to say and what I was most passionate about. And once I got that clear, it was much easier to communicate and bring other people on board.
Well, thank you. We've got Amanda and Marta who've been our guests at Communicate, brought to you by Empower Your English. Zen, it's been a great show. We're having a little rest after this week. So thank you very much for listening to us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.